Okay, hello and welcome to Inspiring Conservation for International Women's Day. At the Museum of Zoology, we are committed to sharing and amplifying the voices of women and underrepresented groups, and we're really thrilled to be joined by an amazing panel of women today to celebrate International Women's Day. We've been working with Women in Conservation Leadership to put together this programme, and we really hope that you enjoy it. To give you an idea of what to expect today, we'll be hearing from our four panelists, and they'll each be giving a short talk about their work, and then we'll have a Q&A section. So if you have questions for the panelists, do pop them in the Q&A, and we'll come to them when we come to the question and answer section at the end of the event. So I'm going to hand you over now to our host, Dr Rosie Trevelyan, who is the Director of the Tropical Biology Association.
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be introducing four amazing women who are making really important contributions in conservation around the world. And as you know, International Women's Day celebrates the achievements of women, be it social, economic, cultural, and political. And all of our panelists today are doing that. And the other theme of this year is Choose to Challenge. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that when you've heard everybody speak, that you'll realise that all of our panellists have also indeed chosen to challenge. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the evening, Abhisheka Krishnagopal. Abhi is a wonderful combination of an artist and an ecologist. She's from India, where she spends her time rescuing urban wildlife and educating people about India's fascinating nature. And she's going to tell us about what she's been doing to connect the young with nature. So Abhi, over to you.
Thank you, Rosie, for that introduction. I feel privileged to be part of this panel today. I'll quickly share my screen. I'm going to be focusing on my work with connecting the young to nature in India. I landed up in this beautiful landscape in the Western Ghats of southern India about a decade ago as a researcher. And at the foothills of this landscape was this picturesque village. And the river, canal, pond network in this semi-arid region had kind of led to a sustained agriculture, and then there was also it had also created a lot of habitats for wild birds as well as other wild animals. All looked well. It was the ideal setting to live and work until one spent considerable amount of time to understand what was going on in the landscape. And this is what I saw. There were several environmental issues. There were cutting down of ancient trees, pollution, the wetlands were degraded, taken over by invasive alien species, and intensive use of pesticides in the agricultural fields, especially in the chili, growing chili crops, which I've just highlighted there in the photograph. And then I also, the more I spoke and interacted with the local communities, I realized that the traditional way of living in harmony with nature was slowly being eroded, and especially with the younger generation because of the education system. And one of the examples I would like to highlight here is when I was talking to a group of children, asking them what is the source of drinking water. They would point at the community tank that supplied water to their houses, but they couldn't connect to the fact that it was the river that originated from the forest that was right in their backyard. So they were aware of the agricultural diversity of the area, but not about the biodiversity of the forest that was the backdrop of these villages. And it was the same as I traveled across the country and worked in several other places. So the more I interacted with the local communities, there was a lot of knowledge that I gained from the elderly But then the picture of these women here working in the fields. So this is one example of this village at the foothills of Himalayas where I worked, where a school was set up by someone who didn't belong to the community, and the villagers were almost told that the life that they led was not of dignity. Like the villagers had started looking down upon themselves as being farmers or somebody living close to the forest, and then they didn't even want their children to learn their own language. So this led me to think that I needed to work with the younger generation, and I also wanted to kind of blend the traditional knowledge that I gained from these the elderly of these communities along with the scientific training I had. And I started engaging with children in creating awareness about the natural world around them. So I used various methods from classroom teaching to games and activities, nature walks, whatever was ideal for the children that I worked with. And also got children to monitor their local biodiversity through sketching and other ways. And if there was access to outdoor space, I would always teach them outdoors. And I also try to use art for my education because art is so deeply rooted in Indian tradition, and then it also broke language barriers since I worked across many landscapes in the country. And so kids would learn about identifying the local biodiversity using sketching or even using various art and craft activities. Also, this helped me because there were places where I worked where there was no access to art materials. So we would just work with natural materials or even sometimes discarded materials that was available. And this is just an example of also using mural with community art to bring together people, both the participants and the viewers, to start engaging about the topics that we were talking about. I even tried to experimented with communicating an ecological concept through dance, through performance. And I also once collaborated with folk performers to also work with children in creating a dance piece. And many times I use the illustrations to come up with education materials. And my focus also was on looking at creating education materials in the vernacular languages, because English is most often education materials are in English, and a large population of the country cannot read in English. So it was important to also focus on Indian languages. And last year when we went under lockdown, so I did a lot of webinars, which was again focusing on stories and art to teach the public about engaging with plants, birds, and other wildlife. And this is again a series of webinars in my own language, which is Kannada. And yeah, I would like to conclude that as somebody from a country like India, I've always been told that it's not safe for girls to travel alone and work in remote locations. And that is one thing that I've always challenged, because yes, women do face problems, but it could be in your own homes or it could be in your offices. So I would say that that shouldn't stop us from traveling and exploring regions. And for me, when I worked in these remote locations, I've been looked after so well by these local communities. And the other thing I also challenged was when I initially started bringing in both art and science together, there was a lot of criticism because I was often told that you're not focused, but I made that my strength. So I believe that one has to really follow your passion in spite of all the challenges or oppositions that you face. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. We are definitely going to follow your advice on that. So thank you for that call to arms. And do please, everybody, write your questions that you have for Abby in the questions and answers session, sorry, in the question session, and we will, I will ask them later for you. So now we're going to go to Zambia, where we're going to meet Liz O'Brien. Liz is a veterinary nurse in wildlife conservation, and she spends most of her time looking after orphan elephants in Zambia. But this evening, she's going to talk to us about the important role that communities play in conservation. Liz, over to you.
Thank you very much, and wishing everybody a very good evening from Lusaka. And I'm going to also share a screen so I can take you through some slides. And hopefully it will all work. Okay, so how do we save elephants? Question I get asked a lot, how do we save elephants? And this is kind of my main job, and various elephants in various stages, different countries, usually orphaned for a variety of reasons. But instead of asking how we save elephants, maybe we ought to question, do we need to save elephants? And let me just give you an idea as to why I think, yes, we do. We need to save every single one of them. And that is just to do, my slideshow is going to go far too fast for me, so I'm just going to pause it here. We're going to go through beginning of the 20th century, approximately 10 million elephants estimated in the world. 2021, the last figures we kind of had out hint more at 425,000 left, which means as humans, we have managed to wipe out 9.5 million elephants in less than 125 years. I don't even know how that's possible to do that. But what it does mean is elephants are now vulnerable. They are, struggling in a landscape that more and more people are living in. So yes, I think we do need to save elephants. And what happens in the organizations I work with, and I've worked with quite a few, is the elephants are rescued, they are rehabilitated, and they are released back into the wild. I spend a great deal of time with Game Rangers International here in Zambia, and that is kind of the rescue, rehab and release. Takes a lot of work. You're looking at a picture now of what goes into the average elephant milk bottle. It's not just a question of going down to Spar and buying a bottle of semi-skimmed off the shelf and feeding it. There's a lot of work to go into nutrition, what the elephants can live, what they need, what they should have had. They vary in ages. The youngest I've rescued was about 4 weeks. The oldest one is sort of 2.5 to 3 years old. So there's a lot of work goes into it. And we're saying to ourselves, okay, we've got to keep going, we've got to keep going, we've got to keep going. But what happens if, when they grow up, they go back into the wild and they get poached? What happens if they grow up and there is no wild for them to go back into? Now, perhaps the question we should be asking ourselves is not how do we save elephants, how does Liz save an elephant, but why are these elephants getting orphaned in the first place? And one of the things we know is human-elephant conflict is causing almost as much problem. I'm sure we're all familiar with ivory poaching. We all hear about it and we're all horrified by it, and it is bad. And there's huge steps being taken all around the world to try and combat that. I don't want to spend too much time on that at the moment. I want to look more at human-wildlife conflict, which is becoming almost as big a problem. It's basically two species trying to share a space and doing it badly. If you're in a rural African community and you see elephant, it's going to think one of two things to you. You're either going to think it's a source of trouble, it's either going to do, it might kill you, it might trample your house, it might break your bicycle, it may eat in one night your entire crop for the whole year, leaving you incapable of paying your school fees, clothing your children, feeding your family. Or you might look at it as a source of food. When you're in a place where there is nothing to do, no jobs and no money, then eating is a very basic human right. And if an elephant weighing 4 to 6 tons happens to make itself available for food, who am I to tell that person who's starving they shouldn't eat it? Who am I to tell that woman who's got a newborn baby not to cut down a tree or burn charcoal to keep the baby warm? We sit back from our very privileged positions saying, oh, this should happen, this should happen, this should happen. But what I've discovered over the last sort of 9 or 10 years with the elephants is how we look at elephants and how living with elephants, they're two very different things. So what can we do? Poverty has been shown in various papers, certainly on poaching and some on conflict, to be a complete driver for poaching and for human-elephant conflict. But poverty does not override pride and dignity. It really doesn't. Imagine being in your 60s, 70s and having to walk 3, 4, 5 kilometers to try and get water in a bucket. So various things, the slide you're looking at now, very kindly provided by Game Rangers International, showing some of the projects they're doing with communities, providing better solutions. Because you can't expect someone to stop doing something unless you give them a reason to do so. I'm not sure where my slideshow has now disappeared to. So we've got to look at giving them alternative, sustainable methods of feeding themselves, methods of providing themselves. Unemployment in Zambia runs at about 80%. So only 2 people in 10 are going to get a job, however qualified they are. So some of the things I'm going to show you now are things I've been getting involved with over the last few months. Remember, I'm wildlife rescue, I save elephants, but this is what I've been doing. I'm using music and art. It was lovely to hear Abby doing the same thing. Nothing unites certainly young children and certainly young Africans more than music and dance. And we're going into the poorest compounds and they are learning dance steps. But within that environment, they are being taught about environmental problems, plastic pollution, looking after their homes, littering, how to compost food waste. And you've got a very young, active audience. And we all know children are very much the future. So I've been trying to do a lot with them. A primary school is now the very proud owner of a new school garden. We'd like to combine the things. They're now using elephant dung compost instead of fertilizers. But the children are learning how to grow things. They're learning how to grow avocados from avocado stones. They're learning how to compost their food waste, and it saves them paying for fertilizer, and it's removing 25% of the rubbish from the garbage can. We have women who live in a compound where there's very little land. We're teaching them how to use what we call sack gardens. They're basically using 50-kilo mealie meal sacks and creating a garden within that sack. They allowed them to provide enough food, not just to feed themselves, but also to sell to other people. Putting desks into empty classrooms. I go to schools, there is literally a room. In fact, sometimes there's not even a room. I employ a local carpenter, so I give some employment to somebody. Women working with the councils up in the northern part of Serenge in Zambia, teaching them new skills. But you can't just come along with a skill and say, okay, I've done my job, you know how to make something, bye-bye, I'm going home. If you're going to come and you're really going to want to make a difference, you've got to be in for the long haul. You've got to be prepared to go through a whole growing season and then repeat it the following year with the people you're teaching doing it for themselves. Because anyone who's ever learned anything, no, there's the theory, there's the practical, then there's the doing it for yourself. So you need to commit for 2 to 3 years to some of these projects. You can't just tell people, here, now you can make wonderful baskets. You can make shitengi bags. If they don't know how to sell them, there's no point making something out of the market. So I try and work with various organizations, mentoring on a business side. And the one thing you'll be getting from all these pictures is there doesn't appear to be a great deal of animals showing. I'm actually just going to go. Sorry, I'm really not very good at this. I said I spend most of my time on a riverbank trying to put a drip in an elephant. So how do we save elephants? We empower people. We educate them, we care about them, we give them books, we provide healthcare, we give them alternatives. You can't tell somebody no if there isn't an alternative. If we look after people, that is how we save elephants. And because I want to finish on a very positive note, I think Rosie at the beginning talked about optimism and earth optimism, and I do have optimism for the future. Reasons to be cheerful, part 1. This lady in front of you is Georgina. She heads up the investigation unit of the Law Enforcement Department, Department of National Parks and Wildlife. She's a real driving force for good in the law enforcement side. She's a woman who's really put her heart and soul into it. This young lady, Louie, I met as an intern some years ago. Not only has she got a passion for wildlife, but she's really pushing to be the next generation of conservationists. She's heading up Women for Conservation groups in Africa, and she's really leading the way by example. And last but not least, a young lady who I met a couple of years ago, Morel, she graduated with an environmental studies degree and for 2 years could not get any work, but she didn't give up. She kept pushing, she kept pushing. She got herself into a job. She's now with Game Rangers International, not only doing research on the orphan elephants, but she's doing important human-wildlife conflict. This photo you're looking at shows her talking to the local headmen. And that in itself is a huge leap forward. I think Abby also mentioned it. We're females in a very male world. And Morel's out there really driving it. She's bonding with these people and she's finding out where their problems are and what we can do to save them. And finally, you have to finish with a cute elephant photo. So please meet Tuco. And when people say, what can I do to help? You can do so much, but research where you're going. If you're going to donate, you know, research. Pick organizations that look at holistic approaches, not just little cuddly animals. Be more ethical in your shopping, but most importantly, do something. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Liz, and for bringing to our screens what it's like in the front line of elephant conservation, including, of course, some cute photos of elephants. But also, I think particularly interesting is the creative solutions that you and your colleagues have come up with, from arts to business. And thanks also for just ending on those optimistic stories of those really inspiring women. I think that's a real theme today, isn't it? We're all looking at not just how to achieve things, but how to be optimistic. So for our next speaker, we have Jessa. Jessa Garibayan was born and raised on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. She began her conservation career when she was just 14, when she started volunteering. And since then, she's done an awful lot of things, but including setting up a youth conservation NGO, which is led by women. And she's going to tell us about her amazing achievements that she's been doing in this NGO. Jessa, over to you.
Just share my screen really quickly. Good afternoon, and thank you so much again for having me and having me present my story on women-led and youth-led conservation, especially in safeguarding the remaining Philippine forest. Really quickly, let me start by greeting everyone and teaching everyone a beautiful Tagalog word. It's called mabuhay, from the root word buhay, meaning life. So mabuhay to every woman and to every man out there who's doing conservation work, and mabuhay to every species and landscape that we're trying to protect. I want to quickly introduce my name. I'm Jessa Garibayan. I'm currently an MPhil in Conservation Leadership student in the University of Cambridge, but also I'm the co-founder of a women and youth-led NGO named Center for Sustainability PH, the work of which I'm going to present to you today. But let me first begin with what brought me in my conservation work. And my answer is this. It's a garbage truck and an avocado fruit. Why a garbage truck? So growing up, I grew up in Puerto Princesa City in what we call Feast of the Forest. And in the Feast of the Forest, the young, the old, religious sectors, everyone, we have to go every year in the mountain forest to plant trees. And kids and the youth were usually brought in massive garbage trucks. But for me, that was such an empowering story that made me believe that any small amount of help to the environment can do a massive contribution. The avocado part, I will leave at the very end to keep you in my talk. But just to zoom out a little bit, this is my hometown, the Philippines. We are part of Southeast Asia. We're a very rich country. The Philippines is one of the 17 megadiverse countries in the world. My hometown itself has so many plants and animals with the name Palawan or Philippine attached to it. Thereby, we have what we call a high level of endemicity, or some of the animals are only found in our region. However, despite being very rich, my country is also highly threatened. This is me on a hiking trip on a beautiful landscape looking over a mining site of what used to be a mountain. This is my hometown. This is Nagtapon Cove, only 30 minutes away from where I live. And 1 hour away from where I live is a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park. However, despite the beauty of my hometown, despite the beauty of my country, again, it's highly threatened. In the screen with you right now is one of the 8 species of pangolin. This is the Philippine pangolin, the most threatened traffic mammal in the world. And alongside illegal poaching, there's also illegal timber poaching, land encroachment, land conversion, monocropping, mining, among many other things. But as young people, we have to organize ourselves and to formalize ourselves to create a more impactful impact in our communities. Therefore, together with 5 locals, we've put together an organization called Center for Sustainability PH, again, a women and youth-led conservation NGO. And the main goal of our organization is to conserve the remaining pristine forests of the Philippines. And we do our work through 3 things: community organizing, scientific research, and political lobbying. And let me just walk you through some photos of it. This is community organizing with the Batak communities of the area. The Batak communities is a disappearing indigenous tribe of about 200 families left. We do our work at nighttime, and we do our work in far-flung communities in which we have to hike and stay for the night. We also do scientific research. This is one of the big expeditions that we just recently conducted before the COVID pandemic hit the world. In our scientific explorations, we also teach local communities in collecting scientific data to empower them, which is kind of timely since COVID hit, that we need more and more local communities in collecting this data. So one of our expeditions landed to the rediscovery of the Palawan toadlet, which was lost to science for over 4 decades. And then finally, we do a lot of political lobbying in which we knock on our politicians' door to make real conservation happen. And all of this work comes from communities, for communities, and to communities, and ensuring sustainability for our projects. And for us, the biggest win for our organization is the declaration of the Cleopatra's Needle Critical Habitat. This is the biggest critical habitat in the Philippines with a size of 41,350 hectares. And if my math is right, we're talking about 1/3 the size of London. We were also able to reforest a very important species of tree for the indigenous communities called Almasiga, or the Agathis philippinensis. And together with the local communities, we planted over 15,000 back into their forests. And so with the theme of Choose to Challenge, I kind of just want to echo what the other speakers already mentioned, Lise and Abby. And I think for our work, we really choose to challenge the stereotypes, especially in the Philippines. We're already in the mountains and people are still questioning us if we can make it to the peak. And we chose to challenge that. If you've also noticed in the photos that I presented, people that we were speaking to were mostly men. And these are not just men, they're also men almost over twice our age all the time. And we chose to challenge that. And finally, as a tiny team of very, very young people, despite having 6 members of our group, we choose to challenge the big goal of establishing a massive critical habitat by knocking on people's doors and organizing communities. And so now I return to my other reason of what brought me to conservation, and this is the avocado. When I was in college, I was paired up with a foreign intern, and we were having a picnic, and to my shock, she put the avocado on toast. You see, in the Philippines, avocados are made into sorbet, they're made into ice cream, and they're made into desserts. And for me, that experience was kind of significant, especially during the International Women's Day. There's so much out there for women, so many discoveries, and it just takes someone to give that opportunity to see it. Just as for me, when I realized that there's other things to do with avocados, there's also a lot of things to do beyond what I'm used to and beyond of what I presented with. And with that, I want to dump all the information of my NGO. Like what Liz said, there's so many ways to support women-led efforts. I hope you can follow us on our different channels. And should you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the comment section or reach out to me. Thank you so much. And again, mabuhay and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Jessa. Mabuhay. And thank you for sharing with us your amazing story and all the different approach. I think one thing we've been learning is just the very different approaches to conservation, and also the importance of looking forward and looking into how can we find sustainable solutions. But I think most importantly, you shared with us, Jessa, how you chose to challenge and you succeeded. And I think you've inspired a lot of people as a result. So now we're going to hear from another inspiring conservationist. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chaona Phiri. She's a wildlife ecologist from Zambia, where she began her career with the BirdLife international partner in Zambia called Birdwatch Zambia. Chaona told me that she had a life-changing experience when she took part on a Tropical Biology Association field course in Tanzania. And since then, she really has done amazing things, and her career has gone from strength to strength. And she's going to tell us about her conservation work in Zambia and how she's been facing challenges and remaining optimistic in spite of those challenges. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Rosie, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm saying evening because it's 7:30 p.m. here. So I'll just go on and share my screen. Hi, my name is Chaona Phiri. I'm a PhD candidate of conservation ecology with Manchester Metropolitan University. And I'm happy to share with you some cases of inspiration and optimism in a challenging field of ornithology in Zambia. So one of my favorite quotes is this one by Helen Keller that talks about optimism as the faith that leads to achievement, and nothing can be done without hope and confidence. So this quote doesn't really say that we have to be naive and not acknowledge challenges that we are going through, but it speaks to the fact that we need to keep that hope and that confidence, and that is what is going to help us to get to our achievements. If you Google just global conservation challenges today, you find a lot of things on the internet about what the challenges to conservation are, and it could very easily get depressing. But one of the things that I'm grateful for as someone who's still young in her career and is interacting with people in the conservation sector in Zambia is they do not try to speak so much on the challenges and how things have not worked in the past, but they still remain encouraging and, you know, encourage us to take a role and contribute to this challenging field. And another interesting thing is if you look at these challenges, each of them, if you think now, each of those 7, there's a project that's happening trying to address that challenge. I mean, already the last 3 presentations we've had have talked about aspects of pesticides, pollution. Those are examples of work that's being done in areas which have been observed to be challenges for conservation. So it's really a sector where, yes, there are challenges, but there are also actions and small wins that are happening, and we really need to highlight those small wins, because those small wins, as much as they're not our targets or end results, the small wins are the fuel that will get us to those end results. So we need to make sure that we stop, reflect, and celebrate those small wins, as they are the ones that will fuel us to get to our target. So one of the things that fascinates me is how much we have going for us. Yes, there are challenges and there's a lot going on that is not working the way we want. But if you look at what we have as 21st century skills, it's a platform where you have access to a lot of things. I'm doing remote sensing work now and range mapping, and I look at maps that were done in the 80s and I'm asking myself, how did they get to do this? They didn't have the type of technology and equipment that we have now, but those things are still there. So I'm thinking, okay, it's a challenge now, but it was worse and it's getting better. And the world is yes, evolving, and there's a lot of people and population growth and demands on land and all of that, but there are also these good things that can help us to fight those challenges that we have, to accomplish the targets that we are setting. So even when you sit with a millennial, for example, you don't want to start talking to them about how there's all this that is not working in conservation, there's this, there are people poaching, there are people trafficking animals. It's always interesting to sit and listen to what ideas they have, what innovation they can come up with to solve some of these problems. And that's all in the skills that we refer to as the 21st century skills, and we need to tap a lot in those skills. So one of the things I always ask myself, even as I was designing my PhD research, was what would I like to be remembered for? And this is a quote I get from Rosa Parks, who talks a lot about what type of person you want to be known for. And I use that when trying to figure out what my research topic would be. So I would like to be known as the person who devised realistic land use management interventions for the black-cheeked lovebird in Zambia. So this is my PhD topic, supported by Claro Park and the Africa Bird Club. I'm just at the end of my third year, and I've been studying this parrot that is endemic to Zambia. It's found in a small corner of the country, and it's a restricted range parrot. So we have 9 species of lovebirds, and this one has the most restricted range. As a result of that, it's classified as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List, mostly because of how small its habitat is. It's about 17,000 square kilometers. So this is an extract from the IUCN Red List, and the orange is where we have this lovebird known to be present. The red is where it was thought to be extinct for the last 20 years. And one small win on my part has been that I found 2 populations in there during my surveys last year. So it's not my end goal, but it's a small win that is fueling me to continue. So one of the issues we have is that the Mopani Woodland, which is the vegetation type that the lovebirds prefer, is the only hardwood tree that is still available for logging in Zambia. So that puts a lot of pressure on this habitat. So this is a typical Mopari forest, and Mopani is common in most of Southern Africa. So this is just post-rainy season. Everything is all nice and green. And then it comes in the dry season and looks totally different. So it's the same woodland in the dry season. So one of the unique things about Mopani is as it grows, it starts to open up and forms the natural cavities. That's the picture that you're seeing on the left. And in those natural cavities is where the black-cheeked lovebird roost and nest. So this makes the Mopani a core to the lovebird's survival, because when you take out the Mopani, you're not just taking out breeding area, you're also taking out roosting area, you're also taking out feeding sites, because they feed on the soft leaves of the Mopani and the insects that get attracted to this, as well as some fruits that grow in the underground story vegetation and grasses. So study area is southwestern Zambia, and it's an extremely dry place. So this is the Nguese River, one of the major rivers in that place. And this is what it looks like November, December before the rains. And this is the same river now. So it's, you get to see this shift between a river that's full of life and flowing and has water readily available, and then you have this river in the dry season. So one of my objectives is to think about how we can solve this water problem, because southwestern Zambia is dry, and the black-cheeked lovebird is a parrot that has a very dry diet. So they have to drink at least 2 or 3 times a day. So what happens is when this river dries, some pools remain open and remain with water, and local communities dig in those pools, make a well from there, and that's where they draw water. So if you're there during the peak hours of the day, you find livestock, you find people doing laundry, fetching drinking water. But when you're there really early, before people come, you find the lovebirds in those shallow pools drinking water. And unfortunately, because the lovebirds are very cautious drinkers, they fly off as soon as people arrive. So this is one clear sign that it's one resource, it's one ecosystem, and now more than ever, it's urgent to actually think about how we resource partition, how we resource share, because this is just one species, and I'm using it as an indicator of this particular ecosystem. So you can imagine how many other species shy away from water sources because people are using them. But again, you can't fence off water sources and say people shouldn't use them, because water is life. It's a core for human life. So what we need to be thinking about now is how we share this resource, which is clearly limiting between this key species, this endemic species that is rich in terms of its tourism benefits to Zambia, as well as this local community that is living in an area that has very little water. So that's one of the things that I'll be looking at. And I've been monitoring 53 water pools. I've classified those in 4 categories. One of the most interesting things is that the category classified as artificial, I have 90% usage there. So I identified 5 artificial water pools, and 4 are being used by the lovebirds. So over the last 2.5 years, I've trained local community members, youth that live in that area, in monitoring these water pools, how many birds are there, what time they were there, what activities were there. And what I'll do with that data now is try and develop models, SDMs or presence absence models, so that I can see which predictors are contributing the most to whether the lovebirds use a water pool or not, and what different scenarios look like if you take out human activity and leave lovebirds alone. What happens if you take out, for example, livestock or wildlife? What happens if it's a pool without vegetation around versus a pool that has Mopani around? What do those models look like? And then that is what I'm going to use now to feed into the design of management interventions for usage of these water pools. I look forward to sharing those data sets and findings with you once I complete my research. Last slide, bonus slide, a tree full of lovebirds. So this is an example where I'm saying I choose to challenge, because this is an unknown species. There's not that much data about it, and it's one species that was last studied in 2000, and I'm looking forward to adding on to those studies, upgrading the species files that are available, and just having up-to-date data about this species. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, we've heard 4 absolutely fascinating talks from 4 truly inspiring speakers. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure you'll agree with me. But as well as learning a lot, I think they've all given us a lot of incentive to choose to challenge as well. So that if there's one thing I'm going to take away from that's it. But it's now a chance for all of you to ask any questions that you'd like. So please do carry on putting your questions in the Q&A box. We've got quite a few coming in already. So that's really good. I think perhaps I'll start with one which is relevant to absolutely everybody's talk. And that is, do you have any observations about whether people of different generations where you work see sustainability differently? So in other words, are there differences between the young and the old about how they see sustainability? Are there any tensions between them as well? So perhaps I'll ask Abby first, seeing as we haven't heard from you for a while. What's your experience with that?
Yes, in the landscapes that I have worked, there are definitely tensions between the generations. Because also what is unfortunate is the kind of education system that exists in the country. It kind of takes the younger generation away from the natural landscape. So it doesn't include anything to do with their local lifestyle or the culture. It's a very alien concept that is taught in this school. So naturally, there's a lot of disconnect from the different generations.
Thank you. Jessa, do you find the same? Because I know you work with different generations as well. Do you find the same?
That's a very interesting question, because I think there is definitely different approaches based on generations. I think now, especially in the Philippines, more and more younger people are getting more and more engaged because we want actually decisions to happen now. We are seeing that our generation are the ones that are taking the brunt of everything, climate change, changes in landscape. We're seeing that it's affecting us more and more every day. So I feel like there's more urgency when it comes to actions coming from the youth.
Okay. And so Jessa, while you've got this stage, there's actually a specific question from you, and you've been talking about the youth. Do you have any tips on how young conservationists can start an NGO?
Beautiful question. I think one of the important things that led me to be in this career path is mentorship. Believe me, there's so many people out there, and especially women out there, that are very willing to give their time to you and to pass on their skills to you. So you go knock on that door, send that informational interviews, and it will definitely lead you to many, many insights and opportunities.
Thank you. And we've got another really interesting question, which honestly, if you hadn't asked it, I was going to ask it myself. And it is, actually, it's from Honor Chilvers. As women, do you find it hard to be heard in a male-dominated industry? Liz, can I ask that to you first?
Yeah, I mean, I've pretty much been working in male-dominated industries my whole life, and the answer is a categorical yes. But I don't get squashed easily. And what I found is it's not really a question of talking louder or whatever. It's just, you kind of have to work harder to get in the door. You have to work harder to get them to listen, because the initial response quite often is, you're a woman, what can you possibly teach me? But if you find a way to relate to them and you can start a conversation, and they start to realize, okay, yeah, I'm prepared to listen. And once I'm prepared to listen, and you can come up with even just one idea and they can see the sense in it, then I find the barriers come down quite quickly. But without a doubt, I mean, and I certainly find it more here than I do back in Europe. Even in the UK, you know, starting in agriculture at 16 years old, it was the same, you're a girl, what do you mean you want to drive a tractor? But I think it is changing, and there are some amazing women coming through, and yeah, so I think it is a challenge. It does hinder a little bit because getting through the door is harder. But I think with the right attitude, once you've got your foot in the door, then the barriers do come down.
Thank you. Chaona, welcome back. While we've got you, I'd love to ask this question to you, because it's something that I'm sure all of the speakers, and I'm sure many of the audience will also have had this experience and have thought about it a lot, which is, as a female, do you find it hard to be heard in a male-dominated industry?
Yes, I do. It's a very thin line between not being taken seriously and being thought of as overbearing and too serious. So that becomes very difficult in terms of finding a balance in trying to get your point across or sharing an opinion, even if it's, you know, something that people understand to be the true situation. You still have people that want to argue with you just because they can.
So what is your what would your one piece of advice be to a fellow woman in how to handle that, how to manage it? What would your one piece of advice be?
What has helped me, what has worked for me, is identifying women in the sector that have been here longer than me, because those are definitely challenges that they've dealt with. And I have asked them how they've navigated that course. So for me, that's something that works for me. So I have a couple of such women that I'm always able to go knocking to and get something off of my chest to, and get advice on how I can deal with that.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question there's a question for Abby. Did you return to the locations where you held your classes and workshops? So in other words, and if you did you see evidence that your work had a long-lasting impact? I think that's interesting, isn't it? We're always talking about how do we have a long-lasting impact in conservation? So the question is, did you go back to those places and did you see that your work had an impact?
Before answering that question, I also want to mention that when I first started experimenting with using art for education, I actually did it more like a research project because I wanted to really see whether it will make an impact. And something I learned from this work is like, I need to design my programs based on the context, because you need to really know your audience, their culture. And so it's like, I can't just think that, okay, I'll get children to do sketching and they'll learn from it. It doesn't work that way. So the very first group of students I worked with were not even comfortable with sketching. They were much more comfortable with the theater form. So this led me to design projects based on what will work and what will not work. And coming to the question, it has been difficult for me to go back to these places because most of this work that I did was voluntary. So I didn't really have a financial backup. I would just get hosted by one of the local communities and I would go and volunteer there. But then what has been nice is some of these kids who have grown up and they've like gotten in touch with me, and there have been children both from the urban and rural area who have taken up education in the environmental sector, or who continue to even if the profession even if they have opted for other kind of education, they kind of retain this information they've learned. And there have been also teachers who continue to, who I interacted with, who continue to teach nature education programs, though it's not part of their job responsibilities. So.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to return to the issue of promoting women in a minute, but we haven't heard from Liz, and we do have a question, which is, Liz, how did you move from working in agriculture to working with elephants? Maybe you found some followers there.
Yeah, no, it's a very simple answer to that. I ended up working with elephants by stuffing mail shots for the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation. My advice to anybody who wants to get into conservation is volunteer, 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 volunteer. You get really, you get a lot of exposure to all kinds of things. So I was literally working for David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, maybe helping them out at evening dues, stuffing mail shots, got into conversation with the chief exec, told her I wanted to take my veterinary nursing back into wildlife. She said one of the projects they supported was this elephant project in Zambia. That was back in 2011, and I think the rest, as they say, is history. It's as simple as that.
Thank you so much. Yes, so basically, we're talking to a lot of people who haven't just sat there and done nothing. They've gone out and really made that difference. I have another question about the participation of women in conservation, and it's from Fabrice, and it's how do you make sure that promoting women in your conservation work doesn't sound like it's discriminating against men? Jessa.
I think I'm going to answer in the context of this entire question, especially in Indigenous communities. I think I'm going to start with sharing my experience that when I started working with Indigenous communities, pretty much 2 years of my career was spent on drinking coffee with Indigenous families. That was my skill, my superpower. And on that note, it means that you're really trying to read the dynamics of the communities. And I think he made a good point of like, not because you invited a woman to a meeting, she's already part of the decision making. And so one of the things that we've noticed is that when you, at least for my organization, when you group together in this particular Indigenous community that we work with, if you group together men and women in one meeting, the tendency is that the men are just going to be doing all the speaking and then the women doing all the nodding. So what we did was to be mindful of these dynamics and started doing meetings separately. So we would do separate meetings for men and then separate meetings for women and then convening them. And that really brought out a lot of insights that weren't heard of before. And to be honest, it's something that we had to learn 2 years over in doing this kind of work. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer that. Maybe Abby, do you have a comment on that?
I haven't really. I mean, when I worked with mostly women, because I mostly work with the young, but not specifically women, and also I haven't made it very obvious that that the men feel threatened when I work with the women community. So, so basically, because most of my interaction with them doesn't come in groups, but it is more of individual interactions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just got one, yeah, I mean, this is something, I mean, obviously gender equality is the cover of a lot of the United Nations. It's one of their sustainable development goals. But you do have to be careful. And just listening to Jessa and Abby, you know, it's very true. I think it's dangerous if you say we are only going
Just to add on a little bit.
I think what's really important in anything to do with communities is you take the time to talk to the communities, the socioeconomic, you get the whole picture. You don't just go steaming in with your idea and say, yep, we're going to do it like this. We're going to give these 20 women a job, you know, and the next thing you know, something's all, there's jealousy or whatever. So it's a big issue. Gender equality, yes. I think the way I try and work with it is I want everybody to be given an equal opportunity. It doesn't matter if they are male or female. Everybody should be given an equal opportunity. So that's the kind of line. So if I'm in doing, for instance, a sewing project, if a man wants to come and learn to use the sewing machine, that's no problem for me.
Thank you, Liz. Chaona, I know you've worked a lot. Even with the last two questions we've had, I mean, you've been working in quite a male-dominated area. I know you once said that you were one of very, very few women ornithologists or bird watchers. So I wonder if you want to share your experience of how you've worked in a male-dominated world, and indeed whether you found that men think perhaps they're being discriminated against if you're being more pro-women. What's your experience?
My experience has been a bit more similar to what Liz has alluded to, trying to understand the history of those communities first before you come in with your idea. So the local buy-in definitely has a big role to play, but also understanding the dynamics of those communities. Some people speak comfortably. Other communities, the women will not show up. What should happen, and the women not saying anything, or the women taking notes on water. The women are the ones that fetch the water a lot. Fetching water.
Okay, I think Chaona has had another internet problem. I hope you could follow her answer. I could actually follow it. It was just in slow motion, I think. But I'm sure we will bring her back. We've still got time for a little bit more time, and we've still got lots of questions. So I'm very sorry that we just won't have time to answer them all. But there's one question which I guess is very much a big question, which several of you perhaps touched on, is from Mark Raven, and Mark's asked a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask the second one, which is how do you get governments involved in a positive way? How do you get governments involved in what you do? And I know, I think, Jessa, you must have done that with some of your work because you've set up this protected habitat in the Philippines. So what would your advice and what's your experience around getting governments involved in a positive way? Over to you, Jessa.
Well, with our organization, what we say is that we have to stick to the goal of the organization, which is to conserve pristine forests in my hometown. So therefore, whatever success, whatever accomplishment, we share it with other stakeholders. We share it with other stakeholders. So on that note, that's how we even bring them more support. If they feel that they're part of the success, if they feel that they're part of whatever species was discovered, you get them more and more hooked into supporting you into your work.
Thanks, that's great. I'm not going to ask everybody that because we haven't got much time left. So I'm going to try and get the most out of this fabulous session. I've got a very quick one here. I think this is for Abby, really. It's from Divya, who says, are urban younger generation part of conservation? Because you know, many of your talks have been about working with communities in rural areas, but Abby, I know you do work in the urban space. So could you answer that one? Are urban younger generation part of conservation? And perhaps you could add how. How do you do it?
Oh yes, of course they are part of conservation because I do work some bit with urban generations that I don't do a lot of work because especially in big cities like where I come from, there are a whole lot of people who are actually doing workshops for children, and these kids also have access to such nature workshops in their school. So I generally prefer to travel to remote locations where most resource people don't travel to. But then urban generation, they do, I mean, children come together to fight for a lot of local environmental issues. It could be about cutting down of trees in the cities or lake pollutions. And also, if you look at a lot of youth who are coming out on the online platform, it's mostly urban youth who have access to internet, and they're well versed in social media. So they definitely are a part of conservation. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm not sure how much longer we've got. I'm going to carry on if I'm not going to be stopped. Okay, so I think there's a wonderful challenging question here. We've been talking about being challenged. We've talked about how to bring on, for example, onboard governments and so on. And now we have one from Harriet, which is, how can we persuade other people to save the environment because many people that this person has met don't care at all? So how do we get people to care? We haven't heard from Liz for a while. Liz, how do we persuade other people to save the environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, and you could be very direct about it, but what I find kind of works best is try and find some sort of simile with something in their life, something they do care about, and transfer what you're caring about over to, well, how would you feel if this happened? Or how would you feel if this was, happened to you? I mean, even simple things, I don't think people realize how little effort in some parts of the world can have such a huge impact. And I think sometimes people don't care because it's too big a problem. It's too huge. I can't save the world, so I'm going to put my hands over my ears, I'm going to sing away, and I'm going to pretend it's not happening. But if you say to them, actually, all you need to do is this little thing, get a compost bin for your kitchen. If everybody did that, we take 25% of waste out of the garbage sites. And it is difficult because, everybody cares about something. We don't all care about the same thing. But I think also trying to get through and say, it's not really about what you think, it's about what you're going to be leaving for your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews. You've got all this wonderful world. What are you leaving for them? But it takes time, and you've got to really, again, it comes back to what I've been saying through the whole thing. You've got to talk to people. You've got to find out what makes people tick and use that as the in, and then start the conversation from there, really.
Thank you, Liz. I think we should hear from perhaps another part of the world, perhaps from Jessa. How do you persuade people to care about the environment from where you are from the Philippines?
I want to echo a lot of what Liz said. I actually wrote down in my notes, bring it closer to home. Even for me, who's already working in the environmental field, sometimes environmental problems can be so daunting that even someone who's well experienced or well taught, it's kind of hard to face it. But if you bring it closer to home, make it digestible and make it easier, then I think it can be done. Anyone can believe that it can be done. And I'm a big believer of stories, the power of how positive stories can impact someone's life. So for me, I want to focus more on, you know, giving focus on conservation optimism. Very timely. It's coming up as well. That we focus on stories of inspiration and stories of how can people work together in achieving such daunting tasks that can be achieved easier when together.
Thank you very much. So I think we should probably be bringing this to a close, because I think we've done our extra 5 minutes. Sorry about that. I stole an extra 5 minutes from all your time, but I'm going to hand back to Ros and just say again, thank you so much for those excellent talks and those wonderful answers to our questions. I know it's going to give a lot of us a lot to think about, but I think more importantly, to go away feeling optimistic and to carry on meeting the challenge.
Yes, I just want to echo that. Thank you for such, I feel so inspired after listening to all of you. Thank you so much to all of our fantastic speakers and to Rosie as well for being a brilliant host this evening. I think also that sharing of experiences and how you've chosen to challenge stereotypes and the status quo in order to help wildlife is really and truly inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. We really hope that you enjoyed this event, and if you want to get more conservation optimism, you're in luck, because at the end of the month there is Earth Optimism, which is being organised by the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. So we'll share with you a link to all of the amazing events that they're planning, so you can find out much more about wildlife conservation and why there's so much to hope for in the future. And we hope to see you at another event very soon. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.